Well, hi everyone. My name is Frank Yoakum. I'm the Executive Director for the Enlisted Association of the National Guard here in Washington, D.C. It's the end of May in D.C. and the summer's coming. I wanted to talk to you today about it and give you a little legislative update on what's going on in Washington, D.C. and some of the things that we're working on here at your association. Some have legislation that's already been entered, and some we are working to get legislation on the books hopefully this year. The biggest thing that we're working on this year is TRICARE Reserve Select for federal employees. We've been trying to work on this over the last couple of years, and the problem has been trying to get legislation actually introduced in both sides, the House and the Senate. Last year we were really close, and we had it in there right into the final bill, the final compromise bill that committee put out. And it wasn't until the big four started talking, the head of the Senate Armed Services Committee and the head of the House Armed Services Committee, and it dropped out right at the last moment. And so when we found out that it dropped out, our legislative director for that, Scott Bowsam, started really working the Hill hard to build consensus on that for this year. And what happened? Well, this year in January, we had bills dropped in January for TRICARE Reserve Select, both on the House side and the Senate side. And so now we're looking at having those both included in the National Defense Authorization Act. Hopefully this year will be the year that we get TRICARE Reserve Select for federal employees. Now, technicians, military technicians make up a portion of that. About 60,000 of the federal workers are technicians. The rest of them are federal employees that are reservists. They might be in Navy Reserve or the Marine Corps Reserve or whatever. And they work for other federal agencies like the FBI or the DEA or Department of Justice or whoever they might work for. And so it would be giving them the option of enrolling in TRS no matter who they work for. So we're working on that. The other part that we're kind of working on, and we think it's a good idea, is TRICARE Reserve Select for all guardsmen at no cost. Right now, guardsmen have to pay 28% of the premium. The government pays 72% of the premium, but their active duty counterparts don't pay at all for their health care. And so we think it's fair that those that are currently serving in the Guard are able to have TRICARE Reserve Select at no cost whatsoever. If they're going to include their family members, yes, they need to probably pony up some money at the 28% mark there for their family members, but for themselves, they should get TRICARE Reserve Select without cost. So we're working on that. The next issue we're working on is the DD Form 214 for all periods of Title X service, not just those that are over 180 days or those over 90 days. We want to be able to document every period of Title X service with a DD 214, and so we're trying to legislate that as well. We're also working on early retirement credit for 12304B service. If you've been ordered to active duty under Title X for COCOM support for under 12304B, that authority came to be in 2012, but it came with no benefits, and we've been cobbling together the benefits for that as we go along. Last year we got GI Bill benefits under 12304B. This year we're working on early retirement credit, and we're trying to get it retroactive to 2012, just like the GI Bill was. And so we're trying to help you out by cobbling together the benefits. So if you get called to that kind of duty, you get the benefits of that duty. The next thing we're working on is military student identifier. Active component children are identified in public schools with an identifier that shows that they're active component kids and that mom or dad may deploy, and if they do, the kids may have some sort of issues with their homework or whatever it might be, and that way the teachers are notified that these children might be affected. We think the same identifier ought to be applied to Guard and Reserve kids because we deployed just like they deploy, and a night away from home is a night away from home, whether it's for training or it's for deployment. And so we're pushing Congress this year, and we have bills that have been introduced to apply the military student identifier to Guard children as well. We're also working on toxic exposure and burn pit issue. As you're well aware, if you've deployed, there's the Army or the military uses burn pits for a lot of wonderful reasons. You all know what those are for, how they smell. But the toxic exposure has caused cancers, in some cases rare cancers, to our members, which has resulted in death. We are working with not only the Department of Defense to have them come up with a different system of incinerating waste, but also with Congress and with VA, so that those who have served may be able to receive a presumptive determination of exposure, just like the Agent Orange for Vietnam. And that way anybody who had served in a combat area who had been around burn pits would have that presumption of disability or presumption of some sort of exposure. We're working on employer tax credits, And this one's kind of different because not only would the employer get a basic tax credit for employing National Guardsmen, but depending on how many times the individual deploys, the tax credit increases. And so there's a scalable tax credit for depending on how often the individual deploys and is away from their job. We're working with VA for mental health services and access to vet centers for all National Guardsmen, not just those who are deployed or not just those who qualify for VA benefits. But as you're well aware, there's 20 to 22 people a day that commit suicide. Out of that, 14 of them do not have access to VA facilities, although they might be currently serving or veterans. And so we're trying to open this aperture up a little bit and allow more people access to VA for mental health services. And we have legislation pending on that as well. We're also working with the VA committees right now for another idea, not in legislation yet, just an idea, and that is a GI Bill credit for every day spent in uniform, not just for Title 10 service or the special Title 32 service, but every day spent in uniform, whether it's drill status or annual training or whatever it might be, counts toward your GI Bill. We're working on that one. We don't have legislation down yet, but we're getting there. We're also looking at revoking the 85-15 rule in schools. The 85-15 rule says that you can't have more than 85% of a class in a college occupied with students who are using their GI Bill. And if it ends up being less than 15% others in the class, then somebody that's using their GI Bill has to drop the class without regaining their GI Bill benefits. And so we're talking to the Secretary of VA actually at the end of May to ask him and continue talks with him about revoking the 85-15 rule. One of the other pieces of legislation that we're working on is federal hiring preference points for Guard and Reservists. Right now, if you are a veteran and you apply for a civil service job, you get a 5-point preference. If you're a disabled vet, you get a 10-point preference. We're working on preference points 2 and 3 and 4 preference points for those that are currently serving, and we're working out the details of that one as well. We're also working on Air Guard federal tuition assistance between the Army Guard and the Air Guard. The Air Guard's the one that doesn't have federal tuition assistance, but the Army Guard does. We're putting some pressure on Congress and on the Air Guard to provide tuition assistance for Air Guard members. We're also looking at removing the 1/30th rule for aviation MOSs or skills sets. Right now, the rule is and has been for several years that you get 1/30th of your flight pay or aviation incentive pay for drill weekends. For every day that you get paid, you get 1/30th of that. But you have to maintain your skills all month long or all year long. And it's a matter of fairness. It's also an incentive to retain aviators. And so we're looking at trying to work with the committees on removing that 1/30th rule. Let me speak a little bit to the retirees on TRICARE for Life. As you know, you enjoy TRICARE for Life as a wraparound coverage for your Medicare Part A and Part B. And there's no cost for TRICARE for Life. There's still no cost for TRICARE for Life, and that's because we have been lobbying in your behalf so that you won't be hit with any kind of fees or have any special costs that you have to bear besides the Part B premiums. And so sometimes what we do, you don't see, and that's a good thing. The work that we do behind the scenes to keep stuff out of legislation is just as important as the stuff we work on to keep stuff in legislation. So let me tell you about something that happened last year. On the House side, there was a proposal for your TRICARE for Life folks to move them off of TRICARE for Life and put them into a DoD-financed Medicare Advantage plan. It was a 2-year demonstration project, and whenever you hear the words demonstration project or pilot project, you should be very, very concerned. And so what was going to happen is they were going to shut down TRICARE for Life, have everybody that's on TRICARE for Life enroll in a Medicare Advantage plan. DoD would pick up the cost of that Medicare Advantage plan for 2 years, and after that 2 years, they would just stop paying for the Medicare Advantage plan, and now it's on you, and there's no TRICARE for Life to go back to. That got defeated. Naugus and Ingus put together a letter to defeat that, and hopefully we've killed it, but it may come back up again. But it's another one of the attacks on benefits for our retirees. So we're trying to keep the TRICARE benefit as robust as possible. Speaking of TRICARE, there's another program that currently serving members have, and it's called the TRICARE Dental Program. in this year's NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, there was language for report on moving TRICARE dental program underneath the federal employees dental and vision program called FEDVIP. Last year, the retirees like myself moved out of the TRICARE retiree dental program and were offered the opportunity to go into FEDVIP. And out of 1.8 million retirees that were in TRDP, 1.4 million of those people went into FEDVIP. It was a very smooth transition. And so now they thought they'd do the same thing with TRICARE dental program. The problem is, what they want to do is they want to move all the active duty family members and all of the Guard and Reserve members that are under TRICARE dental into FEDVIP. And the issue there is that the OPM, number one, isn't geared up to handle the number of transactions that it takes when people go on and off active duty. They'd be going on and off FEDVIP plans into active duty dental plan. The other part is that there's a readiness angle to this where you have to be dentally ready to deploy as well as physically ready to deploy. And OPM simply doesn't have access to DEERS and doesn't have access to the MHS Genesis program for your electronic health record and doesn't have access to deployment criteria like DoD does. And so with 10 different providers or carriers under FEDVIP and only one right now under the TRICARE dental program, you can see where there would be a big mess as far as dental readiness for deployability. And so we're talking to the Defense Health Agency and we're talking to Congress about trying to slow their roll on this one. Although there's a report that has to be submitted by January of next year, we're going to highly discourage them from moving into FEDVIP on that. The last thing I wanted to talk to you about is the fact that your association, INGAS, meets on a regular basis with a lot of great decision makers. For example, we meet with the Defense Health Agency, the people that run TRICARE, on a monthly basis. And so I have monthly visibility with the top leaders in the Defense Health Agency. We also meet monthly with the Secretary of VA. Daniel Elkins, our Veterans Legislative Director, has breakfast with him once a month over at VA headquarters on Vermont. So we have that kind of visibility with those two leaders. We have quarterly meetings that we go to with the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of the Army. In all of those meetings that I've mentioned, generally speaking, we're the only ones there representing the National Guard. And so we have visibility in places where a lot of other people don't. If we can champion something for you, if you have an issue that you would like us to know about, if you have an issue, have a comment on any of the things I've talked about, please get hold of us. My email is frank@ingas.org, or you can email ingas@ingas.org. Call us at 800-234-3264. I'm at extension 4. Leave me a message, I'll call you back, or I'll talk to you. We answer our phones and our messages and our emails all within 24 hours. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to this legislative update.